Hi, I'm Jo from J.H.Leather and welcome to part 1 of our head collar making tutorials. Let's get started. This is the design or the plan for the head collar that we will be making. I'll put a link in the description below so you can grab yourself a copy rather than just having to go off this screenshot. So for this video and this tutorial, we will need two 1-inch strips of bridle butt and one 1 1/8 strip of bridle butt. I'm using 3.5 to 4mm thickness Sedgwick's leather here. And for the hardware, we are going to need two 1.5-inch rings. We're also going to need two stop squares that are 1 inch by 1 1/4. We're going to need two hole buckles. So the ones that I'm using are called swage buckles. And we're also going to need a 1 3/4 inch ring, some 4 to 5mm rope. So for part 1, we're going to be making the headpiece and the two buckle shapes. What we want to do first is grab one of our 1-inch strips and find the best end. So we're going to start with the headpiece, and once we found the best end, we will then cut an egg point. So the easiest way to do this is to turn over the ends or each end of your strip, and then you'll be able to feel with your thumb which end has a looser sort of grain, which will be on the worst end. So once you know your worst end from your best end, we will be cutting an egg point on that best end. And once you're happy with your egg point, we're then going to mark the hole. So these are going to be start 3.5 inches from the end, and then we want 5 in total, 1 inch apart. And once you've got the first end done, what we're going to do is we're going to measure 17.5 inches from that middle hole, because we want that to be the middle hole size of the headpiece. And once you've marked that, we can then mark 2 holes larger and 2 holes smaller. And once you've got your holes marked, we're going to want to add 3.5 inches from that last hole, and that will be the overall length of our strap. Once you've cut that off, we can then put another egg point on this end of our strap. And we want to mark 1.5 inches up from that last hole on both sides. This is going to be where our padding ends and our stitching starts. So you want to do that on either end, and then we can number 1 edge around the whole of the nice grain side of our strap. And then we want to transfer that 1.5 inch mark to the back of our strap as well. And what we'll do is we're going to sort of transfer that to both sides, and then I actually use a number 3 hollow edge tool for the back of this strap. It takes a bit more off and it makes it sort of a bit more round than a normal edge tool would. And we're going to do this on either end and then just edge from the point to that mark. And so that's the headpiece done for the time being. What we're going to do now is move on to the two buckled shapes. So these need to be 3 inches overall. So to start with, we're just going to fold our strap over and to get it to about 3 inches when it's all folded up like this. And once you've got the rough measurement, you can then square the end with your set square and cut this straight. What we're going to do is we can then pop the ring on one end and we can continue folding this around, making sure we get 3 inches. And we want to make sure that the turn is going to be on the top, so it's going to face down on our buckle once it's stitched. Once you're happy with the overall length, we can then roughly mark where we want our crew hole to be. So you can mark that with your thumb and then even it up with your set square. We can also mark where the turn finishes, so we know where we can edge up to. And we can just nick the corners of this strap as well on that buckle end. And then using our number 1 edge tool, we're going to edge from that line to the end and around the other side, just on the grain side only. And once you're happy you've got one cut out, we want to do exactly the same onto another piece. So we can use the original that we've cut out to get the overall length and to find where our crew hole is going to be. And then once you've got your second buckle shape cut out, we're going to head over to the staining bench and stain, polish and crease these 3 pieces that we have cut out. And now once we've done staining, we're just going to do a little bit more work on these 2 buckle shapes. So first of all, we are going to centre up our crew. So we're going to use our divider to draw 2 tram lines either side of where that little crew hole needs to be. And then once we've got those in place, we can then punch our crew all the way through our straps. And then we're going to use our number 6 edge tool and just edge around the back of those crews just to let the buckle tongue sit in there nicely. Now this next bit can be a bit tedious and a bit fiddly, but what we want to do is now we've got our crew hole in, we want to make sure that this is going to be 3 inches long. And to do that, what we can do is, so this middle piece, we're going to take a chunk out of that so it will sit nicely behind our buckle tongue there. So again, with our dividers, we're going to mark where we want the crew to be, and we're just going to punch just a little bit of that crew through that end of the strap. And it's just going to sit on the other side of the buckle. So this is a bit fiddly, like I said. We have to do a little bit of fettling and cutting that inner piece down a bit so we can get this down to 3 inches. So as you can see, mine's a little bit long there, so what I'm going to do is just cut off the end just a little bit and then punch the crew again. And this is what we'll have to do until we get it to 3 inches. We also want to make sure it's nice and tight there down close to that ring as well. And basically that bit on the top is going to sit. We just want, so we'll have one stitch over the edge there. So we need to make sure that's long enough as well. If it's too long, you can just chop it down a little bit. And so once we've got that first one done, what we can do is just transfer the marks onto the second piece. So that these two shapes will be exactly the same. So now we've got our two shapes cut out, what we're going to do is stitch mark them. So we want to get them nice and tight and close in to the buckle there. And mark with our thumb where we want our stitching to start. And then again down on the end, nice and tight to the ring, but we want to make sure that we just get one stitch over the edge of that tab. And then we can even them up onto the other side of our strap. And we'll do the same on the second one as well. And then using our dividers at our stitching width, so mine is usually about 1/8 of an inch, we're going to connect those two dots together. So I'm actually using this more chunky number 7 stitch marker. It's an older one that I have, but it's the little Abbey one that I've got at the moment is just going to be a bit too fine for my liking, which is why I'm using this one. And we're just going to stitch mark along those lines that we have just drawn onto our shapes. And the last thing we're going to do before we can tack this together is to just skive the end. So we're just going to skive the end of the tab that was going to go on the front. And we really want to skive about 5/8 of an inch down to about half thickness. And we want that to be nice and smooth. Once you're happy with your skive, you can then cut off any fluffy bits. And we'll do the same on the second shape. And then we can get tacking these together. So if you're using a buckle like mine, which has a little notch in it, you want to make sure you get that the right way around whilst you are sort of about to tack in, just so you don't have to untack it and retack it. So you can see that little notch that I've got there. That's in the right place. Now this can be a bit fiddly, and if you want to use more than one tack, you can. I just generally put one in because it's quite small, but it is what you feel comfortable with. And we want to make sure it's all nice and tight together, and then place that tack in. And we'll do the same on the other one as well. Now before we get stitching, we are going to stitch mark our head pieces. So the marks that we put on earlier, which are 1.5 inches from that last hole, we're then going to use our dividers to draw the stitching line between them and then stitch mark along that line. So we're now going to cut out our padding foam. So this is 6mm Plastizote, and our strap is 1 inch wide. So I'm going to cut my padding foam strip just over 1 inch wide. And once you've got your strip cut out, we then want to taper the ends and then skive these down to nothing with sort of a little knife blade. So I use a clicker knife blade for this part. And then once we've done one end, we can mark the overall length of the padding that we need. And then we'll square the end and do the same on that end. So we're going to taper it and then skive it down to nothing with our little knife blade here. And then using some 0.8mm padding leather. So this is baby buck napper. And it's nice and thin and great for padding. So we're going to cut a little bit of this out. And then we're going to glue our foam in place. And once it's in place, what we're going to do is with a sort of pen, we're going to just fold the sort of padding leather around the foam and mark roughly where the centre is on both ends. And then what we can do is we can cut off any excess, so when we glue it there's not too much of an overlap in the centre of our padding. And now we've got that cut out, we can put some more glue on here and then fold our padding leather around our foam insert. And once we've got that stuck down, we're going to cut the ends square with our scissors. And we want to do this at an angle so that we don't have any sort of cut edges showing. And then we can glue that onto our headpiece. And now we've got everything prepped up and ready, we can start stitching. So I'm using coarse spun polyester as my thread because this is going on a horse or a head collar, so it's going to be sort of used in all weather. So the coarse spun polyester is a bit more hard wearing than the linen thread. And what we're going to do is we are going to double hand stitch this, and we're going to start with a back stitch at the buckle end. And now this is where being able to use an awl is essential. If you're making sort of thick stuff like head collars and bridle works, stitch marking all the way through isn't really an option. So being able to use an awl and having a good awl is essential. If your awl isn't up to scratch, I will put a link in the description to my awl sharpening video, which will help get your awl nice and sharp for stitching stuff like this. And then when you get to the end of your first side, you want to do 1.5 back stitches. And then you can either cut your threads off there and start a new one for the other side, or you can do what I'm doing, which is to just swap the current threads over onto the other side. So we're going to stitch all through the second to last hole and the third to last hole and put our threads through. And then we will go back towards the ring and do what will effectively be 1.5 back stitches, and that will just lock the threads in place. And then once you've done that, you can continue double hand stitching up towards your buckle. And then we're going to finish with another 1.5 back stitches, and then we can stitch the other shape. So if you've done your stitching like mine, where I've used the same thread, we want to cut these nice and close to the stitching if we can. And then what we can do, if there are any sort of fluffy bits of thread left, we can use our sort of scratch awl and we can just poke them into the little stitch holes. And that will just deal with any fluffy bits. And now we can stitch our headpiece. So again, we're going to double hand stitch this, and our first one is going to be a back stitch. We want to make sure we get over the end of our padding in that first stitch just to hold the end down. And now we've done our stitching, what we want to do is just sand the edges of our shapes very carefully so we don't mark the hardware. And this will just get the edges nice and smooth for when we restain in a minute. And then once we've done that, we can restain and polish the edges of our shapes and headpiece, making sure to get up around the ring and buckle area. And then to get a nice shine on the edges, what I like to do is to put my bone folder inside my staining cloth and then just rub this on the edges of my leather. It just gives me a bit more friction to work with and gets the edges a bit more shiny. And once we've done staining, we can recrease around our pieces, making sure to get around the ring and the buckle there on the shapes. And the final thing we want to do is to even up the holes on our headpiece, and then we're actually going to use an oval punch, if you have one, to punch the holes on this. And you might need to do a test piece first to make sure you get the right sized oval hole. And so that is the first part of our head collar making tutorial. I know it doesn't look like much at the moment, but it is quite a big sort of project for me and for you guys to make if you've not made one before. So stay tuned for episode 2, which is going to be the rolled throat. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, please click the thumbs up button and subscribe for more videos and tutorials, and I'll see you in the next episode.